And so we'll start with making sure I have everybody on the list. So Wilson, Jeremy, Lerone, Randy, Scotty, and potentially Leah. Did I miss anyone other than Andrea, who's on the SGC? And then we have Molly, who's also joined. Okay, so Andrea, the questions are the ones that were sent to you, and for anybody on the web, that's what I'm showing on the screen. So if you want to give a little background and try and address the questions that you can, that would be great.
Yes, I would love to do that. So I actually want to start by thanking you for having me. Some of you probably know that I contacted Amy about having 2 SGC reps, and she very generously offered to have me come to the meeting, and I just think that's a really important thing, to be able to speak openly and directly, and so I want to thank you all for having me come. And I know there are a lot of other issues simmering. Nelson told me yesterday that he's working with, I think, Amy and Randy to meet on the 27th, so I also hope that that will help us move forward in a positive direction. But I just wanted to start with some of my understanding of the history of the calendar situation at Union, and then how I kind of got involved, and some pluses and minuses that I see for the calendar system. And then obviously I'm more than happy to try to answer other questions that you have that are on this list or are not on this list. So some of you may know, Union has been operating under 3 calendar systems. So the BA program and 2 of the master's level programs were all on the trimester system. The MA online has been on a semester system, but it was a different semester system than the PhD.
I'm sorry, can I ask you? How about now?
Okay, good. Right. We had 3 calendar systems, basically, which, as you can imagine, was a pretty big logistical nightmare. So we had something like 7 to 11 different start dates per year for different programs, which meant, the registrar's office was opening, registering people 7 times a year. Financial aid was working 7 times a year. IT was opening new campus web classes 7 times a year. It was just this kind of logistical nightmare. So when I took over as director of the MA in July, Greg Thompson, who was our former IT director, actually came to me and said, is there anything we can do about at least getting the MA online onto the same calendar as the other master's programs? So that would at least be a starting point to getting us all on one calendar. And so I started kind of working with the directors of the other master's programs and having some discussions with some of the PhD folks about what this might look like. And I know some of you know Nelson Soto also has this vision of one graduate college. So this was also a way to get us all into one graduate college system, right, instead of having these disparate calendars working. So I've been working really with the MA faculty and students and with some of the administrators since October to get the Master of Arts program onto the same calendar as the BA and the other 2 master's programs. And we're currently in the process of doing that. So we have a term that begins in April, and so that term will be a little bit shortened, and then we will start on the trimesters August 31st with all of the other programs except for the PhD. So for the master's, it's been really seamless so far. So the master's was kind of the second to last program to join the trimester, and in the past couple of months, Arlene has reached out to me to try to move the PhD as well onto the trimester system. So the PhD has been the only program now who's not on the trimesters. So I kind of took over as chair of this ad hoc committee just in the last month, basically, and so we're in the very initial stages of planning. So So I want to be very clear about that. I don't have all of the answers. There are a lot of questions that are still up in the air, but I do see some real positives. So I wanted to talk about kind of some of the three, I guess, huge issues that I've seen as a faculty member at Union now for almost 8 years, as an admissions committee member as well. So I've been on the PhD admissions committee for God knows how long, 6 or 7 years, and then now as the MA director for a year. So one of the biggest issues I think that I've seen is that there's very little sharing of faculty across programs. So many of you know, I'm sure from your own experience, that in most universities, faculty will teach in the BA, will teach in a master's, and will teach in the PhD, right? So whatever your teaching load is usually in most universities spread out across different levels of education. And that has never been the case at Union, at least since I've been here. So we've kind of had these very siloed faculty, right? I'm a PhD faculty, or I'm an MA faculty, I'm a BA faculty. And that's been really limiting, I think, to the students as well as to the courses that we can offer. And one of the problems, or one of the reasons we've had this very limited sharing of faculty was because of the trouble with the calendars. So Eldon Golden, many of you know, Dr. Golden, who's taught in the PhD, is actually a core faculty member in the MA. And he's told me that in years he's taught both in the MA and the PhD, he's had something like 4 days a year where he wasn't running a course because of the overlap of schedules. So just when the MA would finish their semester, the PhD semester would begin, or vice versa, right? And that's just really not sustainable. It's hard to sell to faculty that, you know, to teach a course in a different level program when they know that they're going to be running courses all year round, right? They don't have any single days in the year when they're not running a course. So that's been a really big issue. There's been issues with sharing faculty on dissertation committees, for example, or theses committees. And I think that's a real benefit of this idea of one graduate college, that students will have access to more faculty who are able to teach across programs, right? Because the calendar is aligned. So that's one of the big problems that I see will be ameliorated here with this unified calendar. Another big problem is that we've had at Union very little student continuation from the BA into one of the master's programs or one of the master's programs into the PhD. And a lot of that has been because of the calendar. So since we've in the MA started moving to this trimester schedule, I've had probably a dozen students reach out to me in the MA and say they're so glad because now they can move right into the PhD from graduating in the MA without having to wait, you know, a whole semester before they can begin. And that whole semester can be good for some people, right? Some people really need a break after their previous coursework. But for others, that means, you know, financial aid starts having to be paid back. They might have to get a full-time job in the meantime, that they're quitting to begin their next level of schooling. So I think there's a real benefit in helping students move through our different programs much more seamlessly. And there is a lot of linkage between the BA and the MA, especially in terms of content. So in the MA, for example, we have this health and wellness major that has a very strong lactation studies concentration. And the BA has a very strong lactation studies concentration as well. But right now we just haven't had very many students who were able to continue from the BA into the MA even when they wanted to because of this kind of funky calendar system. So my hope is that we'll be able to kind of allow students to proceed through our different programs much more smoothly if we're all on one calendar. So the third huge issue that I've seen is that we often lose students entirely when life gets in the way. So I know you've all had this experience, and I've said this before, especially when I was teaching some of the early classes at Union, that, you know, without a doubt, as soon as you start your PhD program, you know, somebody's going to get cancer, somebody's kid's going to get sick, you're going to be in a car accident. I mean, it's just like that's what happens, right? You come into a program and something happens and goes wrong. Well, right now in the PhD, if people wanted to take a semester off, we've often lost them, right? They've often never come back to the program. And I think some of it is just that a semester is a really long time to step away, for some people, from their graduate work. So as much as a faculty, we've always encouraged students, I think, to take time off when they needed it. We've also lost a lot of students in that time off. So my hope is that having a trimester schedule and having not as much time between semesters will mean that if you need to take a trimester off, you can, and you're still kind of fresh and ready to move into the next trimester. So that's kind of where my thinking has been. And I will say the MA students so far have been really positive about the change. The MA faculty has been as well. In terms of the PhD, you know, we are thinking, well, in terms of the MA as well, we are thinking of 16-week trimesters. So every trimester will be a 16-week schedule. I know some people have said in the questions, well, we have these 6-month semesters currently, but that's not really accurate, right? In practice, our semesters have really been more like 20 weeks. If you go January 1 to May 1, when so much of our work has been due, for example, in the PhD, that's really just 20 weeks. So we're cutting off about 4 weeks for the trimester, and that's the same thing that has happened in the MA, right? So even though we have these 2 semester chunks on paper, in practice, the semesters were really only about 20 weeks. So we're only losing about 4 weeks of content for each term. In the PhD, we also know for sure that our degree program will still be 66 credits. So just like, and this is the same in the MA, we haven't changed our number of credits at all to move to the trimesters. So just as has always been the case in the PhD, your coursework will be 66 credits. And what this will mean is that those 66 credits will just now be spread over 9 trimesters. Like I said, we're still in the early planning stages here, so we're not entirely sure how each of those, you know, credits will look per semester or per trimester, but that will be the number of credits will still be the same. We are approved as a 3-year program in the PhD. So our accreditation says that we need to have a minimum of 3 years of coursework and a maximum of 7 years of coursework. So hopefully you all know that that's how our current schedule works, the minimum of 3, maximum of 7. That will stay the same, but now the maximum will just be 21 trimesters, right? So 7 years will stay the same. I have talked with Ed Walton, who's in financial aid, who's the head of financial aid, about some of the financial aid ramifications, and he says that the 3-year minimum could include 8 trimesters instead of 9, so 2 years and 8 months to complete the required 66 credit hours. But that was kind of as low as we could go for our financial aid issues and our accreditation. So for all practical purposes, the program credits will stay the same, right? 66 credits. We'll have 16-week semesters. And at Union, our tuition has always been based on the credit hour. So I know there were a lot of questions that kind of came up in what was sent to me that looked like they were really about financial questions, right? Am I going to be paying more long term? Tom Cunningham, who's our financial guru, has said that there will be a 0 increase in tuition at this time. So because our tuition has always been based on credit hours, that should stay the same. So in the short term, it is true that you would be paying a little bit more per year, right, because you'll be doing 3 trimesters. However, over the course of your study, the payment cycle should equal out because you're still just doing 66 credits. So our tuition has always been based on the credit hour, so that's not going to change at all. Okay, so I want to be very clear there that because we are based on credit hours, the tuition is based on credit hours, the credit hours are staying the same. Over the course of your time at Union, your tuition should not go up. A few more points, then I'll take a breath and take some notes from questions you have. Something that the committee and the PhD committee for the trimesters has only met twice now. So again, still early on, but something we've been talking a lot about is decreasing the number of credits that will count as full-time and half-time. So half-time student we're thinking would be 6 credits, and that's the minimum that is allowed for financial aid. That's just a financial aid rule, right? A Department of Education rule. You have to at least be enrolled for 6 credits. So half-time student status would still be 6 credits, but full-time student status would be 9 credits. And that's something that we also did in the MA to try to allow for more success for our students. We felt like the MA students just probably could not complete all of the coursework that they needed if they were taking 12 credit hours with a slightly shortened term. And so far, that seems to be a good choice, right? So we're thinking about that in the PhD as well. So kind of decreasing full-time status to 9 credits and leaving half-time status at 6 credits. So in terms of the next couple of terms, I wanted to give you some dates as well. This is the trimester schedule as the university has been working on. These are not dates that Andrea Scarpino came up with or that anybody in the PhD came up with. These are the official university trimester dates. So the next term is scheduled to begin August 31st. That's when the MA will be officially on the trimester, and that will end December 20th. Then the term after that we're looking to join as a PhD will be January 4th, 2016. That term would end April 24th, 2016. And then the spring-summer term is scheduled to begin May 2nd, 2016, with the ending date for that being August 21st, 2016. So let me, I don't think I said this final thing here. One of the reasons we initially were accredited at a 3-year minimum program and why we are absolutely going to stick to that 3-year minimum no matter what happens with the calendar is because HLC and OBR, who are our accrediting bodies, have been very, very, I guess, questioning of doctoral programs that bill themselves as fewer than 3 years. So we have always, since our accreditation and since we revamped the program into the model that you folks are already in, we've always been clear about having 3 years as the minimum because of that HLC OBR requirement. So that's the reason that's there. So you'll see there are a lot of different issues at play, right? We're working through some logistical issues at Union itself. We're trying to be very careful to meet the requirements of the Department of Education, of our accrediting body, and just kind of walk very mindfully and lightly through a lot of different interests here. But I'm very optimistic. As I said, I think before, the MA program has been moving very successfully into this. The other 2 master's programs at Union have always been on the trimesters. They have never reported any issues with it. So I'm hopeful. I actually did all of my undergraduate and my MFA work on the trimester schedule, so it's a schedule that I'm very familiar with. And I'm hopeful that, with the SGC representatives and with all the other folks who are working together on this, that it will be a very successful change for the PhD as well. So let me breathe, and I have my computer open with a Word document, so I'm happy to take some notes of your questions, try to answer more that you might have thought of while I was talking.
So Andrea, thank you so much for that overview and addressing as many questions as you have. One of the questions that was sent that I don't believe you touched on would be the impact to residencies. If we have 3 trimesters, and I believe your email said that the plan was to still only require 2 residents, how would that work? Particularly, does that mean that there are courses that students would take that they'd never meet in person, because that's what it sounds like. So do you have any knowledge at this point of how the impact will be on the residencies?
Yeah, so we are absolutely committed to only 2 in-person residencies, so that will not change. We have been very clear in the 2 meetings as a committee that we've had so far that this was something we really want student help on, thinking about the best way to proceed for the residencies. A couple of questions we had were, when is the best time to have those 2 residencies? Would it be nice to have kind of a spring residency and a fall residency, or do people really like the idea of continuing a January residency? So that's the time periods for the residencies are very much up in the air at this point, and something that we would really like help thinking about. However, we have talked a lot about how to do a virtual residency for that 3rd trimester. So if we could have kind of a week to begin classes virtually, maybe have Adobe sessions during that week or something like that, that might be really helpful. In the EDD, which as you know is being taught out, but what they used to do is for new students, so any students that were beginning in a term where there wasn't a residency, they would have those new students come to Cincinnati and meet with the faculty at the beginning of the term. So that's something we could do as well. So maybe we wouldn't have a 3rd trimester for a 3rd residency for everybody, but have maybe an orientation weekend for incoming students where they would come to Cincinnati with the faculty who are teaching their beginning courses and just spend the weekend getting to know people. That's all part of the conversation right now. The only thing that's very clear for all of us is that we are not going to require 3 in-person residencies. But we do have to, again, for our accreditation, we do have to be sure to report student involvement in the beginning of the trimester, which has been kind of an ongoing conversation actually in the MA because we're entirely online. So something we do in the MA to be sure that students are engaged, it's called, you have to kind of report that a student is engaged or never engaged in the course, is we'll require a certain number of discussion posts the very, very first week of the class. So every class, the student has to go in and do like 2 or 3 discussion posts, and that's our check-in that they're actually engaged in the course, that we report that to our, higher ups. And then if a student hasn't gone in and done those discussion posts early on, then we report them as never engaged. So something like that might be possible as well, that we just kind of require some sort of orientation online or some sort of very specific response to a reading or discussion post at the very beginning of the trimester, just to be very, very sure that everybody is engaged. So that's what I know at this point.
Oh, hi, Angela. This is Randy. And unfortunately, my call dropped, and then I picked it back up again. So if you've already addressed, that's okay, but because it's being recorded. But to address the cost of it with the trimester, how will the cost of attendance remain the same, and how financially it work for individuals given that?
Yeah, so you cut out a little bit when you were talking, but what I think I heard was, will the costs remain the same? And they should remain the same over the course of your program because tuition is based on the credit, and the credit hours are going to stay the same.
Okay.
Michael Raffanti, actually, our Associate Dean, has been having a really long conversation back and forth with our financial aid folks about what that might look like. And our financial aid guru, Ed Walton, actually says that the trimester schedule opens up more financial aid to students than is available in the semester schedule. Now, this is not my forte, so please don't quote me on this, but what Ed Walton has said is that loans are usually about $6,000 less than actual tuition for 2 semesters, but they're about $780 more than actual tuition for 3 semesters. So he says under our current system, more students are actually forced to borrow Graduate Plus loans, and on the trimester system, that may not be the case. So his calculation was on the trimester schedule, students will have access to about $780 more in financial aid, which, it's a good thing. So at least in, reporting from afar in something I don't understand at all, it does seem to me that Ed Walton thinks the trimester opens up more financial aid possibilities for students.
Okay, would it be okay for us to reach out to him just to get that specific layout so that we give students an idea of what they can expect and how they're going to fund their education? Because I know right now, due to the cost of attendance, there's a small amount which people have to borrow, the Grad Plus loan, and it's based on a credit check. And so I think someone's question to me, which was a direct email, because they couldn't understand how that shaked out, was would they have to borrow more, and what happens if they don't qualify for the more, and are they not able to go for a certain trimester or whatever the case may be. So
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I honestly don't know if he'll respond
okay.
to you directly. I hope he will.
Okay.
But as I said, from the email correspondence that I've seen between Ed and our Associate Dean, Michael Rafanti, he was very, very clear that he thought with the numbers that you would have actually $780 more
Okay.
On the trimester schedule. But yes, I encourage you to reach out, absolutely,
Okay.
And see if we can get some of those numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm like the worst. I'm a poet,
No.
Numbers
okay.
don't make a whole lot of sense to me. So
That's okay.
he sends me these numbers, and I just look at them and I nod.
That's quite all right.
Thank you both. A couple other questions have come in. So one has been, what is the effect for those writing their dissertations or those no longer required to attend residency? Do we know that yet?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I honestly wasn't sure what it meant because I don't think there's any effect, right? If you're already ABD and you're basically just writing your dissertation, you're doing dissertation credit. So I'm not sure what that means. I mean, you're already not required to attend residency at that point, so you would still not be required to attend residency. But I wasn't quite sure.
So I think maybe the gist of it is that for those who are writing their dissertations, would they be, paying for that dissertation supervision for more semesters or not, or more trimesters?
Okay.
And then for those not yet at the dissertation stage, but they're past residency because they've gone less than 12 hours, for those couple times, or they're doing part-time, again, are they going to be attending residency through Adobe like they do now? Are there plans to change how they interact courses?
Got it. Yeah, got it. Thank you. Yes, so I know that dissertation, whatever it is, DIS 780, I think, something like that, whatever that course shell is, has been $2,700 a semester. And I did speak to Arlene about that this last week, and she said she would like to work on making sure that evens out over the course of the year, so that students are not paying more over the course of the year to do their dissertation work. So, what is that, $5,400 a year or something like that? We would just divide that by 3. So each trimester, you would be paying the same amount over the course of the year, but less. So no, there's no plan on having you pay an extra $2,700 a trimester to work on your dissertation. The plan is to reduce the trimester fee at that point so that it would even out over the course of the year. And then in terms of once you've finished residencies, there's no plan at this point to have students, attend more. They would just attend through Adobe like we're doing now.
Thank you. And then another question that came in from Wilson is about the coursework and the 3 classes that occur at residency. A lot of material is covered. Will the same amount be covered online? What's the plan or thoughts about how to handle those kinds of changes?
Yeah, that's a really excellent and humongous question. So that was something that the MA faculty and I had a lot of discussions about, and I know the PhD faculty will have a lot of discussions about it as well, because as you say, you know, we've been teaching we've been packing content into 20 weeks, and now we're going to just have 16 weeks to do content. So I think the plan, at least initially, as it's, you know, as we've met these two times, in the PhD committee, is to try to work really hard with the faculty to make sure each seminar is covering a little bit less material. What we decided to do in the MA was just really focus our content and be clear about what should be accomplished in each trimester's course without watering down content, right? Because nobody wants watered down content. So I think that we're going to be having some really hard conversations about pedagogy in the PhD as well. But what can we accomplish in one course? What kind of outcomes do we want to have for each course? And those are always ongoing conversations we have as a faculty anyway. So, you know, we're used to having those conversations, but there's no plan to kind of water down content or anything like that, but we're just going to have to be very clear about limiting some of the content so that you can actually succeed in the 16-week trimester. Again, I want to just be clear that we're really only losing 4 weeks in practice. So in theory, right, when you look at these huge January 1 to July 1 terms or something like that, it looks like we're stripping, you know, way back in terms of how much teaching time there is. But in practice, that's not how the semesters have actually ever worked, at least as I've been teaching them in the PhD, and as I know many of my colleagues have taught them. So we're really losing only 4 weeks of content, and I think that's really much more doable in terms of, you know, maintaining really strong classes. And like I said, all of my undergrad and grad work was on the trimester schedule, and you know, I went to a top 20 MFA program. I think I got a good education. So I have faith that it's possible to have a really rigorous and strong curriculum on this schedule.
Thank you. So I know there are a few more questions in the chat, but rather than read them, since they were extremely long questions, I'm going to open it up to anybody who submitted it, anybody else on the call who wants to ask questions.
Dr. Scarpino, this is Lerone. Could you re-clarify the statement that was made with regard to how the Grad Plus loans will be affected for a tri-semester schedule? I know you said you're not the best person to ask, but at least just to reiterate what you did say.
Yes. So as I understand it, that right now on the semester schedule, loans are typically about $6,000 less than the actual tuition for 2 semesters. So Ed Walton said this forces many students to borrow Graduate Plus loans on the 2 semesters. But he thinks that on the trimester schedule, loans will be $780 more than the actual tuition. So you'll get, almost $800 more than the base level tuition. So the hope is that you would not need to borrow Graduate Plus loans on the trimester system.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Hi, Andrea. This is Molly Miller. I'm just wondering how, if we're doing the same amount of credit hours every term, if it's still only going to be 3 years long. So if we're still doing, between 9 and 12 credits every trimester, how is it still going to be 3 years out?
Well, we're actually looking at 6 to 9 every trimester. So 9 credits would be full-time status versus 12 right now, and half-time status would be 6 credits. So we've already started to talk a little bit about things like, maybe the first trimester when students are brand new to our program, asking them to do 6 credits that term, right, to kind of get them into the program and ease them in a little bit. Then maybe the trimester when you're doing comps or you're, I can't remember what it's going to be called now, but the that final kind of comps kind of class, that we would only do 6 credits that trimester as well. So each trimester will be 6 to 9 as opposed to 6 to 12.
Okay, because it's just I was under the impression that I guess it might just be for financial aid and enrollment purposes that 9 credits currently is full time, but maybe that's not 9 credits to be done on time. Maybe that's the difference.
The difference between what they're actually suggesting students do for a full-time schedule versus what the financial aid requirement is?
Okay.
Yeah, well, that might be some of it. I mean, financial aid, Ed Walton was very clear you need 6 at least to be considered part-time or half-time, and then 9 is considered at least full-time. So it may be that that's the case right now currently, but we've been operating as a program with 12 credits as full-time. But yeah, there are differences between, financial aid requirements that come down from the Department of Education versus our program requirements. So moving forward, what we want to do is say, as a program, we're going to have 9 credits be full-time status.
Dr. Scarpino, another question. It's Lerone again, maybe one or two. First question, with the tri-semester schedule, will we still have virtual breaks?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that would be something that we should talk about as a committee moving forward. I know that we will not be having mid-semester residencies. We have,
okay.
I know a lot of students and others have not been pleased with the mid-semester residency, so that is something that we have agreed as a committee that we will no longer, on the trimester schedule, require mid-semester residencies. But that's something I think we should discuss as an ad hoc committee.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, just a brief question. With the tri-semester schedule and with the small window to transition from one semester to the next, and I know that there's some students who have raised concerns about IU, for instance, December and May and June, or late November, December. Students use that time to pursue further research in their own areas. Will the trimester schedule still encourage that, or will it still impact it in a way that may not give students opportunities to pursue their research interests with that month or month and a half off before starting the next semester?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And again, that's something we need to talk about as a committee from the pedagogical standpoint. There will only, as the calendar is written at this point, there are basically 2 weeks off between trimesters for students. And that's a lot shorter than a month off for students, right? My hope is that we're able to work more research time into individual trimesters, but I just don't know what that will look like in practice when students start doing their work. But again, as on paper, we've never had huge breaks. We actually don't have on paper a university policy about break periods. So one of the things I think is really important to think about the trimester is increasing flexibility. So something that the faculty is really excited about, in all honesty, is the possibility of having a trimester off. So if our current load for full-time faculty is 5 classes a year. So if we can do, 3 classes trimester 1, 2 classes trimester 2, then we can have an extended break for trimester 3, for example. And I think a similar kind of situation would be possible for students to say, you know what, I have this, amazing conference or amazing research opportunity for this trimester. I'm going to take this off and kind of alter the rest of my schedule that year around that. So I'm really looking at it in terms of increased flexibility, not decreased flexibility. But again, I think that's a conversation from a pedagogical standpoint that we should really be mindful of continuing to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate your questions to my answers. I may have more, and I'm sure my colleagues will too. But again, just thank you for your availability so far. I really appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate it too. I mean, I know I've worked with many of you. I haven't worked with all of you, but something I hope that those of you who've worked with me know is I really do believe in collaboration and open communication, transparency, and that's always just been how I operate in the world, and I have no plans to changing that. So, as I told Amy, I'm happy to come to more meetings of SGC. I'm happy to, do whatever I can to make this a strong transition. I believe it can be a strong transition.
And one more brief question, and I apologize. I may have missed it, but I just need to ask this question. With the tri-semester schedule, would that change the amount of required residencies that we have to attend?
That is a good question. I don't know. I think we're at 8 residencies right now. Is that correct?
6, I believe.
That's 6 that are required?
Yes.
So I don't know. I think that, again, would be a conversation.
Depends on cohorts, though.
I think it does, because I think we changed it with the newer students.
Oh, okay.
So we might
cohort
leave it.
15 only has to do 6, and I think we're the last cohort to have to do that.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, again, that would be something I think we should discuss. If we're doing two residencies a year, 2 actual on-the-ground residencies a year, I would assume that the number would stay the same, in all honesty. But that's something that we could discuss as a committee, absolutely.
And then, Andrea, to follow up on that, one of the questions potentially for the committee is, right now the residencies are all required in the beginning, so your first 8 semesters for the incoming students, and for those further along in the program, the first 6, all have to be ones where you attend residency, and then it's later in the program you don't. Is there a potential with the option that there'd be 3 semesters a year that, like you said, some students might come in, start a semester, or their second semester would be one where it'd be a virtual residency. So is there any more flexibility to say, I really want to do this semester, but I can't come to residency and do your required attendance, at a different residency? So that was just a question.
Yeah, I think we should discuss that as a committee. I mean, I honestly, I'm really excited about the potential for shaping these residencies. Lori Miltich, actually, she's a faculty member in the MA and the PhD, actually had a really lovely idea, I think, of trying to build one residency around commencement in Cincinnati. So national commencement usually only includes faculty and then our graduating students, which is always a little bit sad, right? Sometimes other students will come fly in and just kind of cheer on their pals who are graduating, but for the most part, our commencements tend to be pretty small. And so we kind of got excited about having a residency around the time of commencement so that more students could attend, and more students would already be on the ground at Cincinnati to just come and cheer on their pals who are graduating. So, I think that's a potential. I don't know necessarily that we'll be able to arrange that, but I'm excited by that possibility. So I think there's some interesting potentials with having the flexibility with the residencies.
Dr. Scarpino, this is Jeremy. The one question I do have, looking at how the proposed trimester dates and scheduling would transpire, you stated that basically the new calendar year would end up being something of the effect of August 31st to December 20th, January 4th to April 24th, May 2nd to August 21st. That would mean that the residencies would start, for example, for the fall semester or trimester, say the August semester. That means that the residencies would start, like, hypothetically speaking, the 31st.
So that's what we would have to discuss, right? So I think that that could be a virtual residency. We could do another start somehow, right? Start online and have a residency, later on in the term, maybe. We could have a residency that begins, do a a January winter term residency and the May spring summer residency and not a fall on the ground residency. That's, that hasn't been decided. So that's still flexible and open for discussion.
Okay, because just from my personal perspective and many students that I've spoke with over the course of the email, since the email was distributed a couple weeks back or a week back or so, a lot, and it's something that the administration may want to think about as well, because a lot of the students in this program, at least a lot of the students that I speak to, are college professors. A lot of the students also are high school professors or are high school teachers or some educational field. If there's a certain number of trimesters that are required for people to meet, for example, if I'm a high school teacher and August 31st is one of those trimesters, there's no way I will be able to attend because I will be in school.
Right.
If January 4th was a trimester and I was a high school teacher or a secondary education, junior high or elementary education teacher, January 4th to August 24th, there is no way I would be able to attend. If I was also a high school or secondary or lower education, or an elementary education, sorry about that, teacher, there would be no way I would be able to attend the May 2nd to August 21st. So now, looking at it from a background of having a corporate background for 8 years with a Fortune 500 company, moving to trimesters doesn't really seem that it would be that beneficial for union from the student perspective at the PhD level, from what my experiences are as a college professor even as well. August 31st to December 20th, there'd be no way I'd be able to make that. January 4th, possibly, depending on if and
well,
when
Jimmy,
the
that's our
semester would
current
start.
schedule anyway, right? We already have January.
But there would only basically be one for most people, is basically what I'm saying, at the most. And if I had to go to 8 of these, that means I would be going to residencies well into my dissertation process because I'd only be able to hit one a year. And I would go over the 7-year timeline.
I'm not sure I understand. No, I'm sorry.
Well, if I was able to go, if the administration allowed for, or HLC or whoever makes up that rule, that there's one residency, if I was only to make the January residency because of my teaching responsibilities, which looking at these dates would be accurate right now, because I don't get out of classes as a college professor until like May 14th, May 15th, May 10th, around then. So I would only be able to make one. And if my commitment is to make 8, I mean, that's a significant change in how the program is of attending residencies, because I only be able to make one every year. So now am I over my 7-year max?
Well, so hold on, because right now the way it's structured is you do have to attend 2, right? So I think that we're not going to go below 2. I think you would still be required to attend, 2 a year. We're still going to have at least 2 residencies a year.
Okay.
That won't change.
But still, that would limit the market. Looking from a corporate background, from a business model perspective, that would limit the market for people like me in particular, and many other people within our actual cohort 15 in particular, due to the fact that they teach and are educators. They would only be able to go to possibly 1, maybe none, and then how would that be? Would there be accommodations made?
Yeah, that's a good
all I'm
question.
saying.
Yeah, and I'm happy.
You just limited a whole group of people, basically, and if you have a PhD in education, those people are educators probably, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Andrea,
This is Doug Walker.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. Is it possible, because from what I'm understanding, this is really actually still in flux as far as the residencies and what the dates will be for those and the number and all that. So it would be possible, say, for that May to August trimester to still have the residency in July rather than right at the beginning of May, right? I mean, that's all still up in the air.
Yes, so that's exactly right. And we've talked about that as a committee. Do we want to leave it in the middle of the term, for example, and have some sort of check-in midway through the term? So the calendar dates of each trimester are set in stone, yes. However, the residency dates are not set in stone. That's something that we, as a committee, would like to discuss. So, we will be having our January residency 2016 just as we normally would have, but moving on from there, that's an open conversation.
So, Andrea,
there are more questions, but we're getting close to the end, and one of the things that Andrea wanted was student representation for her committee. So can I just see if there's anybody on the call who would be interested in being a student representative? And Andrea, can you remind us as to when the committee is likely to meet?
Yes.
Amy, I have a question about that, though. I have a quick question about that before you get into that. So when we come, in a few months or a month and a half, when we meet for the residency, representatives may change. So the people who are going to join the residency committee now, the residency or trimester committee now, will those just remain our representatives throughout? Because the way SGC works is that we're about to change over again in July.
Right. So, and I explained that to Andrea. So
okay.
I would think that that we could do it either way, so that the students could, volunteer to be representatives until new elections are held, and then if they want to continue, the student government can even if they are no longer on the SGC, could vote to just allow them to continue to be members of the committee.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think they would need. I think they should continue because it's going to be a short period. So
right, and that's I think the leaning is they would.
Yep.
Hopefully they can commit to the whole time period and we won't have representatives, but basically we don't want to exclude the people who weren't able to attend the call. So right now I just see who is interested so that I can then send that by email and we can, get a determination on who's going to be representative. So Andrea is going to tell us when the meetings are going to be held so you can tell if you're available.
Yeah, so our next meeting is currently scheduled for Monday, June 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern, but we're happy to be flexible, right? We've met twice. So if there's, a later time or whatever works better for somebody, I don't want somebody to not, be on the committee because we chose a time that doesn't work. So currently that's our next meeting, but that's not hammered into a stone by any stretch.
Andrea, the reps that would be on this committee, would they have voting powers too in the committee, the students?
Yeah. Well, we haven't been voting on anything. So it's a committee that's, we're a working group basically, and we, as a committee, put forward ideas to the dean's office. So we haven't even discussed things like voting. I think we've always worked on the committees in a collaborative process. So I think, yes, your voices count, right? I don't know that we're ever going to be doing like hands up in the air voting because that's not how any of our committees have worked at Union, but we're advisory. So what we're doing is putting together the advisory plan for the dean's office as a committee. So basically, I don't think it's not Andrea Scarpino says X and that's what happened. It's, this ad hoc committee says X and we pass it on to the dean's office and continue the conversation.
Any other questions? Feel free to volunteer if you're interested. Otherwise, I'm not hearing volunteers so far, so.
I could volunteer. This is Jeremy. The only thing is when the school year starts at the end of August, I would have to go an hour later because I have class until 4:20 Eastern time on Mondays.
And Andrea, this is Amy Harris as well. I would be happy to be on the committee, but the 4 p.m. Eastern is 3 p.m. Central, which I would need an hour later as well.
Okay. So what if we did 5 p.m. on Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern, Monday, June 1st?
And if somebody else wanted to jump in and take my spot, I don't have a problem with that. But just so everybody has a chance to be on it.
Okay, so I will send this out by email, and I will ask everyone who was not able to attend if anyone's interested, and based on whether or not, and I'm going to ask for a quick turnaround of a few days. Hopefully people can respond to an email in a few days, and that way we can get final names to Andrea for the, on the student committee, student representatives for the committee.
Andrea, would it matter if these representatives are full-time or part-time students?
No, I don't think that matters at all.
That would not matter.
No, I'm happy to have anybody who wants to work with me on this. So if you're part-time and you have time and want to join, absolutely.
No, I understand that. Where I was asking the question from would be from the perspective of a part-time student will not be the same as the perspective of a full-time student. Would that come into play given the nature of what's being dealt with here?
That's a very good question.
I'm hoping that you folks will continue having discussions, and those discussions will be filtered through our two reps. So my hope is that if it ends up being Amy and Jeremy, that part-time students and full-time students are giving their questions and comments to those two who bring it to the committee. But I mean, if you folks would prefer to have one part-time student and one full-time student as the reps on the committee, that's fine too. I'm happy for you to.
Which would be the case if it ends up being Jeremy and me. I'm part-time and he's full-time, so from our own personal perspectives, we could represent those two elements. We can't necessarily personally represent every concern, though, so it is important that everybody bring their questions so that they all get addressed.
Well, I would like to definitely send out an email and us discuss who the representatives would be and all that stuff before we decide now. So,
right, exactly.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
We have two volunteers. We're going to see who else wants to do this, and then once we decide by email, we'll send the final list of the two representatives to Andrea.
And just so it's clear, if anybody else would like to do that, that's not a problem. I just raised my hand because it didn't seem as though. But that's fine if somebody else wants to do it. I don't have any problems at all or feel any kind of personal thing against it. So. Oh,
I started to, but I think what I would like to see as vice chair, I'd like to see some other students get involved who have been responding to us by email. So, I just want to put the opportunity out there beyond who's here today.
I agree.
And, yeah.
Yep.
Just from my perspective, just so you know, I'm actually going to be taking a little bit of time off next week for travel. So please just let me know if I don't respond to you right away by email. It's just because I'm traveling. But if we do need to change that meeting time from Monday, June 1st, I'm happy to do that. Just give me a little bit of turnaround since I'm hoping to, not be on email as often as I usually am next week.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? We are about 5 minutes over. So any other things? I do want to say that Andrea seems entirely open to continuing questions, being able to talk to the SGC or any type of group again. So I don't think this would be the last opportunity to ask a question, and there will be the student representatives to send questions to. And I'm sure if a student felt like sending a question directly to Andrea, they could do that too. And so, you don't have to feel like this is it, but I do want to respect people's time, and we are a few minutes over.
Well, okay, Amy, I think I'd like to cover a little bit that Andrea brought up in the very beginning, where she said the three issues at Union. And looking at those issues, Andrea, I'm kind of perplexed because, for example, the third one was the loss of students when life gets into the way. But nationwide, PhD programs lose almost up to 50% of the students that start. So I don't quite understand how Union is going to do something that's going to be any different than what a national trend is stating is in place already. Then the other one was a continuation from the BA to the MA to the PhD. I have never heard of any college recommending that students get all 3 degrees at the same school. I have always heard, matter of fact, just the opposite. If you get your master's at Chicago, well, you go someplace else and get that PhD. So,
well, no,
I
didn't mean to suggest that you would get your entire education, but it is common, I think, for people often to do their MA and PhD at the same university, or to do their BA and MA at the same university. So I don't want to suggest that we're trying to get a student to do their entirety of their education at Union, but just facilitate the opportunity. So maybe a student will move on, from the BA into the MA, for example, to finish off. We don't have a PhD program in lactation studies, right? So, that student would have to go elsewhere anyway. But to allow the student to come from the BA into the MA and finish their MA in lactation studies and move on elsewhere, I think is a really positive thing. And the same for MAs and PhDs. I mean, a lot of universities actually have dual admission programs. So you may be admitted as an MA PhD candidate, and halfway through you get your MA, and then you finish your PhD, or you don't, you go elsewhere, right? So the idea is to allow for more accessibility if students want that. Not that, we're trying to say students should do that. And you may be right. We may, it may be that the trimesters don't allow students to bounce back more quickly when they have to take a term off. That may absolutely be the case. And you're right that a lot of people who start PhD programs don't finish, and, there may be nothing to do about that. But I do think it's a hopeful thing that you would be able to maybe bounce back a little faster if you did have to take a trimester off.
Thank you both. Any other questions? It's about 9 minutes after 10 Central, 11 Eastern. All right, so thank you all so much for joining. Thanks especially to Andrea for being here to provide all the background and answer as many questions as she was able. And we will be in touch with everyone about who the representatives will be, and give everyone an opportunity to volunteer who's interested. And then we will go from there. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Scarpino.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks,
much.
Paul.
Thanks. Good night. Good afternoon.
Now, have we adjourned the meeting as well?